Chapter 1 The Website of Dreadful Night. 5 hours New York jet lag, and Case Pollard wakes in Camden Town to the dire and ever-circling wolves of disrupted circadian rhythm. It is that flat and spectral non-hour, awash in limbic tides, brainstem stirring fitfully, flashing inappropriate reptilian demands for sex, food, sedation, all of the above, and none really an option now. Not even food, as Damien's new kitchen is devoid of edible content, as its designers display windows in Camden High Street. Very handsome, the upper cabinets faced in canary yellow laminate, the lower with lacquered, unstained apple ply. Very clean and almost entirely empty, save for a carton containing 2 dry pucks of Weetabix and some loose packets of herbal tea. Nothing at all in the German fridge, so new that its interior smells only of cold and long-chain monomers. She knows now, absolutely, hearing the white noise that is London, that is Damien's theory of jet lag is correct, that her mortal soul is leagues behind her, being reeled in on some ghostly umbilical down the vanished wake of the plane that brought her here. Hundreds of thousands of feet above the Atlantic. Souls can't move that quickly, and are left behind and must be awaited upon arrival like lost luggage. She wonders if this gets gradually worse with age, the nameless hour deeper, more null, its effect at once stranger and less interesting. Numb here in the semi-dark, in Damien's bedroom, beneath a silvery thing the color of oven mitts, probably never intended by its makers to actually be slept under. She'd been too tired to find a blanket. The sheets between her skin and the weight of this industrial coverlet are silky, some luxurious thread count, and they smell faintly of, she guesses, Damien. Not badly, though. Actually, it's not unpleasant. Any physical linkage to a fellow mammal seems plus at this point. Damien is a friend. Their boy-girl Lego doesn't click, as he would say. Damien is 30, Case 2 years older, but there's some carefully insulated module of immaturity in him, some shy and stubborn thing that frightened the money people. Both would have been very good at what they've done, neither seeming to have the least idea of why. Google Damien, and you will find a director of music videos and commercials. Google Casey, and you will find Cool Hunter. And if you look closely, you may see it suggested that she is a sensitive of some kind, a dowser in the world of global marketing. Though the truth, Damien would say, is closer to allergy, a morbid and sometimes violent reactivity to the semiotics of the marketplace. Damien's in Russia now, avoiding renovation and claiming to be shooting a documentary. Whatever faintly lived-in feel the place now has, Case knows, is the work of a production assistant. She rolls over, abandoning this pointless parody of sleep, gropes for her clothes, a small boy's black fruit-of-the-loom t-shirt thoroughly shrunken, a thin gray V-necked pullover purchased by the half-dozen from a supplier to New England prep schools, and a new oversized pair of black 501s, every trademark carefully removed. Even the buttons on these have been ground flat, featureless, by a puzzled Korean locksmith in the village a week ago. The switch on Damien's Italian floor lamp feels alien, a different click, designed to hold back a different voltage, foreign British electricity. Standing now, stepping into her jeans, she straightens, shivering. Mirror world. The plugs on appliances are huge, triple-pronged, for a species of current that only powers electric chairs in America. Cars are reversed, left to right, inside. Telephone handsets have a different weight, a different balance. The covers of paperback look like Australian money. Pupils contracted painfully against the sun-bright halogen. She squints into an actual mirror. canted against a gray wall, awaiting hanging, wherein she sees a black-legged, disjointed puppet, sleep hair poking up like a toilet brush. She grimaces at it, thinking for some reason of a boyfriend who'd insisted on comparing her to Helmut Newton's nude portrait of Jane Birkin. In the kitchen, she runs tap water through a German filter into an Italian electric kettle, fiddles with switches on the kettle, one on the plug, one on the socket, blankly surveys the cannery expanse of laminated cabinetry while it boils, bags some imported Californian tea substitute in a large white mug, pouring boiling water. In the flat's main room, she finds that Damien's faithful cube is on, but sleeping, the night-light glow of its static switches pulsing gently. Damien's ambivalence toward design showing here. He won't allow decorators through the door unless they basically agreed to not do that which they do. Yet he holds on to this Mac for the way you can turn it upside down and removes its innards with a magic little aluminum handle, like the sex of one robot girl's in his video, now that she thinks of it. She seats herself in this high-backed workstation chair and clicks the transparent mouse. Stutter of infrared on the pale wood of the long trusted table. The browser comes up. She types fetish footage forum, which Damien, determined to avoid contamination, will never bookmark. The front page opens, familiar as a friend's living room. A frame grab from number 48 serves as backdrop. Dim and almost monochrome, no characters in view. This is one of the sequences that generate comparisons with Tartovsky. She only knows Tartovsky from stills, really, though she did once fall asleep during a screening of The Stalker, going under an endless pan, the camera aimed straight down in close-up at a puddle on the ruined mosaic floor. But she is not one of those who think that much will be gained by analysis of the maker's imagined influences. The cult of footage is rife with subcults, claiming every possible influence. Truffaut, Peckinpah, the Peckinpah people among the least likely are still waiting for guns to be drawn. She enters the forum itself now, automatically scanning titles of the posts and names of the posters in the newer threads, looking for friends, enemies, news. One thing is clear, though. No new footage has surfaced. Nothing since the beached pan, and she does not subscribe to the theory that it is Cannes in winter. French footage heads have been unable to match it in spite of countless hours recording pans across approximately similar scenery. She also sees that her friend Parkaboy is back in Chicago, home from an Amtrak vacation, California, but when she opens his post, she sees that he's only saying hello, literally. She clicks respond, declares herself Case P. Hi Parkaboy.nt. When she returns to the forum page, her post is there. It is a way now, approximately, of being at home. The forum has become one of the most consistent places in her life, like a familiar cafe that exists somehow outside of geography and beyond time zones. There are perhaps 20 regular posters on FFF, and some much larger and uncounted number of lurkers. And right now, there are 3 people in chat, but there's no way of knowing exactly who until you're in there, and the chat room she finds not so comforting. It's strange even with friends, like sitting in pitch-dark cellar conversing with people at a distance of about 15 feet. The hectic speed and the brevity of the lines in the thread, plus the feeling that everyone is talking at once, at counter purposes, deter her. The cube sighs softly and makes subliminal sounds with its drive, a vintage sports car downshifting on a distant freeway. She tries a sip of the tea substitute, but it's still too hot. A gray and indeterminate light is starting to diffuse the room in which she sits, revealing such Damiani Anna has survived the recent remake. Partially disassembled robots are propped up against one wall, 2 of them, torsos and heads, like elfin, decidedly female crash test dummies. There are effects units from one of Damien's videos, and she wonders why, given her mood, why she finds them so comforting. Perhaps because they are genuinely beautiful, she decides. Optimistic expressions of the feminine. No sci-fi kitsch for Damien. Dreamlike things in the dawn of half-light, their small breasts gleaming, white plastic shining faint as old marble. Personally fetishistic, though. She knows he'd had them molded from a body cast of his last girlfriend. -2. Hotmail downloads 4 messages, none of which she feels like opening. Her mother, 3 spam. The penis enlarger is still after her, twice, and increase your bust size dramatically. Deletes spam, sips the tea substitute, watches the gray light becoming more day. Eventually she goes into Damien's newly renovated bathroom. She feels the shower down in it prior to visiting the sterile NASA probe, or step out of some Chernobyl scenario to have her lead suit removed by rubber-gowned Soviet technicians, who'd then scrub her with long-handled brushes. The fixtures in the shower can be adjusted with elbows, preserving the sterility of scrubbed hands. She pulls off her sweater and t-shirt using hands, not elbows, starts the shower, and adjusts the temperature. 4 hours later, she's on a reformer in a Pilates studio in an upscale alley called Neil's Yard. The car and driver from Blue Ant waiting out on whatever street it is. The reformer is a very long, very low, vaguely ominous and Weimar-looking piece of spring-loaded furniture, on which she now reclines, doing V position against the footrail at the end. The padded platform she rests on wheels back and forth along tracks of angle iron within the frame, springs twanging softly. 10 of these, 10 toes, 10 from the heels. In New York, she does this at a fitness center frequented by dance professionals. But here in Neil's Yard, this morning, she seems to be the sole client. The place is only recently opened, apparently, and perhaps this sort of thing is not yet so popular here. There is that mirror world in gestation of archaic substances, she thinks. People smoke and drink as though it were good for you, and seems to be still in sort of honeymoon phase with cocaine. Heroin, she's read, is cheaper here than it's ever been, the market still glutted by the initial dumping of Afghani opium supplies. Done with her toes, she's changed to heels, craning her neck to be certain her feet are correctly aligned. She likes Pilates because it isn't, in the way she thinks of yoga, meditative. You have to keep your eyes open here and pay attention. That concentration counters the anxiety she feels now, the pre-job jitters she hasn't experienced in a while. She's here on Blue Ant's ticket. Relatively tiny in terms of permanent staff, globally distributed, more post-geographic than multinational. The agency has, from the beginning, billed itself as a high-speed, low-drag life form in the advertising ecology of lumbering herbivores. Or perhaps as some non-carbon-based life form, entirely sprung for the smooth and iconic brow of its founder, Hubertus Big End, a nominal Belgian who looks like Tom Cruise on a diet of virgin's blood and truffled chocolates. The only thing Case enjoys about Big End is that he seems to have no sense at all that his name might seem ridiculous to anyone, ever. Otherwise, she would find him even more unbearable than she already does. It's entirely personal, though, at one remove. Still doing heels, she checks her watch, a Korean clone of an old-school Casio G-Shock, its plastic case sanded free of logos, with a scrap of Japanese micro-abrasive. She is due in Big Ant's Soho offices in 50 minutes. She drapes a pair of limp green foam pads over the footrail, carefully positions her feet, lifts them on invisible stiletto heels, and begins her 10 prehensile. Chapter 2. Bitch. CPUs for the meeting, reflected back in the window of a Soho specialist in mod paraphernalia, or a fresh fruit t-shirt, her black Buzz Rixon's MA-1, anonymous black shirt from a Tulsa thrift, the black leggings she'd worn for Pilates, black Harajuku schoolgirl shoes. Her purse analog is an envelope of black East German laminate, purchased on eBay, if not actual Stasi issue, then well in the ballpark. She sees her own gray eyes, pale in the glass, and beyond them, Ben Sherman's shirts and fishtail parkas, cufflinks in the form of the RAF rounded model that marked the wings of Spitfires. CPUs, Case Pollard units. That's what Damien calls the clothing she wears. CPUs are either black, white, or gray, and ideally have to come into this world without human intervention. What people take for relentless minimalism is a side effect of too much exposure to the reactor cores of fashion. This has resulted in a remorseless paring down of what she can and will wear. She is literally allergic to fashion. She can only tolerate things that could have been worn to a general lack of comment during any year between 1945 and 2000. She's a design-free zone, a one-woman school of whose very austerity periodically threatens to spawn its own cult. Around her, the bustle of Soho, a Friday morning building, toward boozy lunches and careful chatter in all these restaurants, to one of which Charlie don't surf. She will be going for an obligatory post-meeting meal. But she feels herself tipping back down into a miles-long trough of jet lag, and knows that this is what she must surf now. Her lack of serotonin, the delayed arrival of her soul. She checks her watch and heads down the street toward Blue Ant, whose premises until recently were those of an older, more linear sort of agency. The sky is a bright gray bowl crossed with revealed contrails, and as she presses the button to announce herself at Blue Ant, she wishes she'd brought her sunglasses. Seated now opposite Bernard Stone Street, familiar from Blue Ant's New York operation, she finds him pale and freckled as ever, with carroty hair upswept in a weird Aubrey Beardsley flame motif that might be the result of his having slept on it that way, but is more likely the work of some executive barber. He is wearing what Casey takes to be a Paul Smith suit, more specifically the 118 jacket and the 11T trouser cut from something black. In London, his look seems to be about wearing many £1,000s worth of garments that appear to have never been worn before, having slept in the night before. In New York, he prefers to look as though he'd just been detailed by a tight scrum of specialists, different cultural parameters. On his left sits Dorothea Bernadetti, her hair scraped back from her forehead in a hot nerd intensity that Casey suspects means business and trouble both. Dorothea, whom Casey knows glancingly from previous and more minor business in New York, is something fairly high up in the graphics design partnership of Heinze and Pfaff. She has flown in this morning from Frankfurt to present HMP's initial shot at a new logo for one of the world's two largest manufacturers of athletic footwear. Big End has defined a need for this maker to re-identify in some profound but so far unspecified way. Sales of athletic shoes, trainers in the mirror world, are tanking big time, and the skate shoes that have already started to push them under aren't doing so well either. Casey herself has been tracking the street-level emergence of what she thinks of as urban survival footwear. Though this is so far at the level of consumer repurposing, she has no doubt that commodification will soon follow identification. The new logo will be this firm's pivot into the new century, and Casey, with her marketability allergy, has been brought over to do in person the things she does best. That seems odd to her, if not odd, archaic. Why not teleconference? There may be so much at stake, she supposes, that security is an issue, but it's been a while now since business has required her to leave New York. Whatever. Dorothea's looking serious about it. Serious as cancer. On the table in front of her, perhaps a millimeter too carefully aligned, is an elegant gray cardboard envelope, 15 inches on a side, bearing the austere yet whimsical logo of Heinze and Pfaff. It's closed with one of those expensively archaic fasteners consisting of a length of cord and 2 small brown cardboard buttons. Casey looks away from Dorothea and the envelope, noting that a great many 90s pounds had once been lavished on this third-floor meeting room, with its convexly curving walls of wood suggesting the first-class lounge of the transatlantic Zeppelin. She notices threaded anchors exposed on the pale veneer of the convex wall, where once had been displayed the logo of whichever agency previously occupied the place, and early warning signs of Blue Ant renovation are visible as well. Scaffolding erected in a hallway where someone has been examining ductwork, and rolls of new carpeting stacked like plastic-wrapped logs from a polyester forest. Dorothea may have attempted to out-minimalize her this morning, Casey decides. If so, it hasn't worked. Dorothea's black dress, for all its apparent simplicity, is still trying to say several things at once, probably in at least 3 languages. Casey has hung her Buzz Rixons over the back of the chair, and she now catches Dorothea looking at it. The Rixons is a fanatical museum-grade replica of a US MA-1 flying jacket, as purely functional and iconic a garment as the previous century produced. Dorothea's slow burn is being accelerated, Casey suspects, by her perception that Casey's MA-1 trumps any attempt at minimalism, the Rixons having been created by Japanese obsessives, driven by passions having nothing to do with anything remotely like fashion. Casey knows, for instance, that the characteristically wrinkled seams down either arm were originally the result of sewing with pre-war industrial machines that rebelled against the slippery new material, nylon. The makers of the Rixons have exaggerated this, but only very slightly, and done 100 other things, tiny things as well, so that their product has become, in some very Japanese way, the result of an act of worship. It is an imitation more real somehow than that which it emulates. It is easily the most expensive garment Casey owns, and would be virtually impossible to replace. You don't mind? Stone Street producing a packet of cigarettes called Silk Cut, which Casey, never a smoker, thinks of somehow being the British equivalent of the Japanese Mild 7, 2 default brands of creatives. No, says Casey, please do. There's actually an ashtray on the table, a small one, round and perfectly white. As archaic a fixture in America, in the context of a business meeting, as would be one of those flat and filigreed absinthe trowels. But in London, she knew, you might encounter those as well, though she'd not yet seen one in a meeting. Dorothea offering the pack, but not to Casey. Dorothea declining. Stone Street puts the filter tip between Tidley's mobile lips and takes out a box of matches that Casey assumes were acquired in some restaurant the night before. The matchbox looks very nearly as expensive as Dorothea's gray envelope. He lights up. Sorry we had to haul you over for this, Casey, he says. The spent match makes a tiny ceramic sound when he drops it into the ashtray. It's what I do, Bernard, Casey says. And you look tired, says Dorothea. 4 hours difference, smiling with only the corners of her mouth. Have you tried those pills from New Zealand? Stone Street asks. Casey remembers that his American wife, once the ingenue in a short-lived X-Files clone, is the creator of an apparently successful line of vaguely homeopathic beauty products. Jacques Cousteau said that jet lag was his favorite drug. Well, Dorothea looks pointedly at the H&P envelope. Stone Street blows a stream of smoke. Well, yes, I suppose we should. They both look at Case. Case looks at Dorothea right in the eye. Ready when you are. Dorothea unwinds the cord from beneath the cardboard button nearest Case, lifts the flap, reaches in with thumb and forefinger. There is silence. Well then, Stonestreet says, and stubs out his silk cut. Dorothea removes an 11-inch square of artboard from the envelope, holding it at the upper corners between the tips of perfectly manicured forefingers. She displays it to Case. There is a drawing there, a sort of scribble in thick black Japanese brush, a medium she knows to be an in-house hallmark of Herr Heinze himself. To Casey, it most resembles a syncopated sperm, as rendered by the American underground cartoonist Rick Griffin, circa 1967. She knows immediately that it does not, by the opaque standards of her inner radar, work. She has no way of knowing how she knows. Briefly, though, she imagines the countless Asian workers who might, should she say yes, spend years of their life supplying versions of this symbol to an endless and unyielding flood of footwear. What would it mean to them, this bouncing sperm? Would it work its way into their dreams eventually? Would their children chalk it on doorways before they knew its meaning as a trademark? No, she says. So Stonestreet sighs, not a deep sigh. Dorothea returns the drawing to its envelope, but doesn't bother to reseal it. Case contract for the consultation is of this sort specifies that she absolutely not be asked to critique anything, or provide creative input of any sort. She is only there to serve as a very specialized piece of human litmus paper. Dorothea takes one of the Stonestreet cigarettes and lights it, dropping the wood match on the table beside the ashtray. How was the winter then in New York? Cold, Casey says. And sad. Is it still sad? Casey says nothing. You're available to stay here? Dorothea asks, while we go back to the drawing board. Case wonders if Dorothea knows the cliché. I'm here for 2 weeks, she says, flat-sitting for a friend. A vacation, then? Not if I'm working on this. Dorothea says nothing. It must be difficult, Stonestreet says, between steepled, freckled fingers, his red thatch rising above them like flames from a burning cathedral. When you don't like something. Emotionally, I mean. Case watches Dorothea rise and, carrying her silk-cut cross to a sideboard where she pours Perrier into a tumbler. It isn't about liking anything, Bernard, Case says, turning back to Stonestreet. It's like that roll of carpet there. It's either blue or it's not. Whether or not it's blue isn't something I have an emotional investment in. She feels bad energy brush past her as Dorothea returns to her seat. Dorothea puts her water down beside the H&P envelope and does a rather inexpert job of stubbing out her cigarette. I will speak to Heinze this afternoon. I would call him now, but I know that he's in Stockholm meeting with Volvo. The air seems very thick with smoke now, and Case feels like coughing. There's no rush, Dorothea, Stonestreet says, in Case hopes that this means there really, really is. Charlie Don't Surf is full. The food, California, inflected Vietnamese fusion, with more than the usual leavening of colonial Frenchness. The white walls are decorated with enormous prints of close-up black and white photographs of Nam-era Zippo lighters, engraved with crudely drawn American military symbols, still under cruder sexual motifs and stenciled slogans. These remind Case of photographs of tombstones in the Confederate graveyards, except for the graphic content and the mature nature of the slogans, and the Nam theme suggests to her that the place has been here for a while. If I had a farm in hell and a house in Vietnam, I'd sell them both. The lighters in the photographs are so worn, so dented, so sweat-corroded, that Case may be, well, the first diner to have ever deciphered these actual texts. Bury me face down so the world can kiss my ass. His surname is Heinze, you know, Stonestreet is saying, pouring a second glass of the Californian Cabernet that Case, though she knows better, is drinking. It only sounds like a nickname. Any given names, though, have long since gone south. Ibiza, Case suggests. Sorry, Bernard, I'm tired. Those pills from New Zealand. There is no gravity. The world sucks. I'll be fine. A sip of wine. She's a piece of work, isn't she? Dorothea? Stone Street rolls his eyes, which are particularly brown, inflected as with mercurochrome, something iridescent, greenly copper-tinged. 173 Airborne. She asks after the American wife. Stone Street dutifully recounts the launch of a cucumber-based mask, the thin end of a fresh wedge of product, touching on the politics involved in retail placement. Lunch arrives, and Case concentrates on tiny fried spring rolls, settling herself for auto nod and periodically, but sympathetically, raised eyebrows, grateful that he's carrying the conversation ball. She's way down deep in that trough now, with the half glass of Cabernet starting to exert its own lateral influence. She knows that her best course here is to make nice, get some food in her stomach, and be gone. But the Zippo tombstones with their existential elegies tug at her. Foo cat. Restaurant art that diners actually notice is a dubious idea, particularly to one with Case's particular visceral but still somewhat undefined sensitivities. So when it looked as though Harvey Knickers weren't going to come aboard, nod, raise eyebrow, chew spring roll, this is working. She covers her glass when he starts to pour her more wine, and she makes it easily through lunch with Bernard Stonestreet, blipped occasionally by these emblematic place names from Zippo Graveyard, Chu, Chi, Kui, Non, lining the walls, and at last he has paid and they are standing up to leave. Reaching for her Rixon's where she'd hung it on the back of her chair, she sees a round, freshly made hole, left shoulder rear, the size of a lit tip of a cigarette. Its edges are minutely beaded brown with melted nylon. Through this visible gray interlining, no doubt to some particular Cold War mil spec poured over by the jacket's otaku makers. Is something wrong? No, Case says. Nothing, putting on her ruined Rixons. Near the door on their way out, she numbly registers a shallow Lu-site cabinet displaying an array of those actual Vietnam Zippos, perhaps a dozen of them, and automatically leans closer. Shit on my dick or blood on my blade. Which is very much her attitude towards Dorothea right now, though she doubts she'll be able to do anything about it, and will only turn the anger against herself. Chapter 3, The Attachment. We'll take a little break here.